What if I told you there was a man who could charm an entire village, win the hearts of the most powerful people, and stash away secrets so scandalous, they could bring down his entire reputation? This is the untold story of Mr. Equatorial, a man who had it all, and nearly lost it all. Once upon a time, in the lush, sunlit town of Ayorie, there lived a man who could sway hearts with a single word, convince even the skeptical with a single glance, and, if rumors were to be believed, charm the stars from the sky if he so wished. This man was none other than Mr. Equatoria, known as Wiperboards to those few brave souls who dared to jest in his presence. His legend stretched far and wide, from the borders of Equatoria to the neighboring towns, painting a picture of a man as golden as the midday sun and as mysterious as the darkest night. Mr. Equatorial was no ordinary man. He had risen to wealth and influence with a silver-tongued charm that seemed unbreakable. People marveled at his suits, tailored from the finest fabrics money could buy, his cane topped with a glistening silver sphere that reflected the awe-stricken faces of those around him, and his glimmering mansion perched at the top of the hill overlooking Ayorie. But more than his riches and his image, it was his voice, a smooth, velvety baritone that flowed like honey, that held people spellbound. Every evening, he would emerge onto his balcony just as the sun dipped below the horizon, giving a smile that could disarm the hardest of hearts. And every evening, the townspeople would gather below, drawn to him like moths to a flame. He would wave, bestow a few words of wisdom, and the people would hang on to each word as though they were gifts of the gods themselves. Remember, dear friends, he'd say, with a twinkle in his eye, life is a game, and I, Mr. Equatorial, am here to make sure you all win. And, for reasons unknown to anyone else, they believed him. Mr. Equatorial wasn't merely a man of wealth, he was a man of influence, the kind who could broker peace between rival families, settle disputes over land, and even convince the town's most stubborn merchants to lower their prices for a good cause. And he didn't do it for free, oh no. Every service came with a price, but he was so subtle, so disarmingly charming, that no one minded. He had a way of making people feel as if his favors were the highest honor, as if they should be grateful just to be in his debt. Among his closest confidants, Mr. Equatoria was rumored to possess a vault, a golden, mystical vault hidden somewhere within his grand mansion, accessible only by a key that he wore on a silver chain around his neck. Legend had it that inside this vault lay the secrets of his power, the whispers of his lovers, and the confessions of the most influential people in Ayorie. Some even said it contained the very heart of Equatoria itself, a pulsing stone of pure energy that granted him his magnetic charm and uncanny influence. The truth was that Mr. Equatorial's vault didn't hold gold or jewels or magical stones. Instead, it held memories, specifically, memories of Mr. Equatorial's numerous, scandalous liaisons with the prominent women of Ayorie. One by one, he had charmed his way into the lives of the most influential women in town, the chief's daughter, the town herbalist, the wife of the wealthiest merchant, and many more. Each encounter was recorded, preserved as a memory, within enchanted spheres, glowing orbs that hummed with a life of their own. Why did he keep these recordings, these memories? He called it historical preservation, a collection of the art of love that would one day be his legacy. But in truth, it was his insurance policy. In a town where gossip spread like wildfire, these memories served as his safety net, a reminder to each of these women that their secrets, too, were tucked away in the vault, protected and preserved. Mr. Equatorial fancied himself an artist of romance, a collector of beauty, a man who appreciated the finest things in life. And, in his mind, these memories were his masterpiece. It was one fine evening, as the sun set over Ayorie, that young Shoddy found himself at the gates of Mr. Equatorial's mansion, polishing the intricate ironwork. Shoddy was a clever boy, with bright eyes and a curious heart. He had a knack for finding himself in the middle of things, and today was no exception. While working, Shoddy noticed Mr. Equatorial himself pacing the balcony, muttering to himself. Shoddy, ever curious, crept closer, pressing his ear to the wall, trying to catch snippets of Mr. Equatorial's musings. Or, the vault. My glorious vault. My legacy, Mr. Equatorial murmured, oblivious to Shoddy's presence. A spark ignited in Shoddy's mind. He had heard whispers about this vault before, but to hear Mr. Equatorial himself speak of it, now that was something else. What could possibly be inside? Gold, jewels, perhaps even ancient relics from the old times. His imagination ran wild. After finishing his work, Shorty waited until he was alone. His heart pounded as he crept through the shadows, making his way to the back of the mansion where the vault was said to be hidden. He reached it, a golden door set into the wall, gleaming even in the dim evening light. Shorty's hands shook with excitement. He reached out to touch the door, and as his fingers brushed the surface, he felt a warm hum, as if the door itself were alive. He leaned closer, pressing his ear to the cold metal door. That's when he heard its laughter. Soft, lilting laughter, followed by a low, familiar murmur. He strained to listen, heart thundering as the voices inside became clearer. He could make out snippets, voices he recognized, the chief's daughter, the herbalist, even the wife of the merchant. Shorty pulled back, eyes wide, his mind reeling. He had stumbled upon something far bigger than he'd imagined. And he knew one thing for certain, he had to know more. Over the next few days, Shorty became consumed with thoughts of the vault. He could barely eat, barely sleep, his mind spinning with possibilities. He imagined the secrets inside, the strange voices, the echoes of lives hidden from the world. But how could he get in? The lock was intricate, unlike anything he had ever seen, and he knew that if he tried to force it, he'd be caught immediately. That's when Shorty had an idea, a plan as risky as it was clever. He would wait for the festival, the biggest celebration of the year, when the whole town, including Mr. Equatoria, would be distracted. On that night, with the help of a few friends, he would sneak into the mansion, find the key, and unlock the vault. As the days ticked by, Shorty prepared for the big night, gathering tools and enlisting the help of his friends, all sworn to secrecy. They practiced their roles, timing each step to perfection, until they were ready. On the night of the festival, the entire town of Ayorie came alive with music, laughter, and light. People danced in the streets, children chased one another through the crowds, and vendors sold sweet treats and savory delicacies. Mr. Equatorial, as always, was at the center of it all, greeting everyone with a dazzling smile and a grand wave. But Shorty wasn't at the festival. He was crouched behind a bush outside Mr. Equatorial's mansion, heart pounding as he watched the lights dim and the last of the servants leave for the festivities. This was his chance. With a deep breath, Shorty crept through the shadows, slipping into the mansion and making his way to Mr. Equatorial's quarters. He moved quickly, his heart pounding, his every sense alert. And then, finally, he saw it, the key, glinting in the moonlight, hanging on a hook by the door. Shorty snatched the key and made his way to the vault. His hands trembled as he inserted the key, turning it with a soft click. The door swung open, revealing the golden spheres within, each one glowing with a soft, enchanted light. Shorty stepped inside, his eyes wide with wonder as he gazed at the spheres. He reached out to touch one, and as his fingers brushed the surface, the sphere flickered to life, projecting an image into the air. He watched, stunned, as the scene unfolded before him, a scene of Mr. Equatorial with the chief's daughter, whispering sweet words, laughing, their faces close in a moment of intimacy. One by one, Shorty touched the spheres, each one revealing a similar scene, each one a recording of Mr. Equatorial with a different woman of prominence in Ayorie. Shorty's shock turned to excitement, then to realization. This was bigger than he'd ever dreamed. He had uncovered the secret of Mr. Equatorial himself. The night of the festival was unlike any other. Every corner of Ayorie sparkled with lanterns, vibrant fabrics, and the laughter of friends reunited for the town's biggest celebration of the year. The air was filled with the scent of roasted meats, sizzling spices, and sweet treats. Drummers beat rhythms that seemed to make the very earth dance, while people of all ages, dressed in their finest clothes, moved with joy and abandon. The boys marveled at the sight. For a moment, they forgot their mission, caught up in the surreal beauty of the spheres. Each orb contained a snippet of Mr. Equatorial's secret life, a memory preserved in shimmering detail. They reached out, carefully lifting the spheres and arranging them for transport. As the boys prepared to transport the spheres to the festival grounds, they suddenly heard footsteps approaching from down the hall. Heart pounding, Shorty signaled to his friends, and they scattered, hiding in the shadows just as a figure appeared. It was one of Mr. Equatorial's personal guards, patrolling the mansion. Shoddy held his breath, clutching one of the spheres tightly, praying the guard wouldn't notice the open vault door. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. The guard paused, noticing the soft glow coming from the vault. He stepped closer, peering inside, his eyes widening in surprise as he took in the sight of the spheres. In a moment of panic, Shoddy tried to sneak away, but his foot caught on the edge of a carpet, and he stumbled, dropping the sphere he was holding. The orb hit the ground and rolled out of the shadows, right into the guard's path. Before Shoddy could react, the sphere activated, projecting a life-size image of Mr. Equatorial and one of the town's prominent women, locked in an embrace that left no room for doubt about the nature of their relationship. The guard stared, mouth agape, as the scene played out before him. Shoddy froze, caught between the urge to run and the thrill of the unfolding chaos. The guard, snapping out of his shock, scrambled to gather the fallen sphere. But in his haste, he knocked over several more, sending them rolling down the hallway. One by one, the spheres activated, projecting scenes of Mr. Equatorial's romantic encounters like a twisted, enchanted slideshow. By this point, Shoddy's friends had emerged from their hiding spots, and they exchanged looks, silently agreeing that there was no turning back now. They gathered the spheres and carried them out of the mansion, heading toward the center of town where the festival's grand feast was about to begin. The entire town of Ayorie was gathered in the main square, eagerly awaiting the start of the grand feast. Tables were set with platters of food, jugs of sweet wine, and baskets of bread, while the villagers chatted and laughed, basking in the joy of the celebration. As Mr. Equatorial took his place at the head of the table, ready to deliver his annual toast, Shoddy and his friends made their move. They positioned the spheres in the square, then, with a deep breath, Shoddy activated them all at once. The effect was immediate. One by one, the spheres lit up, projecting life-size images of Mr. Equatorial's private liaisons for all to see. Gasps filled the air as the villagers turned to watch the unfolding scenes, their faces a mixture of shock, amusement, and disbelief. There, in front of the entire village, was Mr. Equatorial, wooing the chief's daughter, laughing with the herbalist, embracing the merchant's wife, all caught in moments of undeniable intimacy. For a moment, the square was silent, the villagers too stunned to react. Then, slowly, a ripple of laughter spread through the crowd, growing louder and louder until it became a roar of amusement. Mr. Equatorial, realizing what was happening, looked around in horror. He tried to stand, tried to speak, but his voice was drowned out by the laughter and jeers of the crowd. "What is this?" he sputtered, his face turning red as he watched his secrets play out before him. This is an invasion of privacy." But the villagers weren't listening. They were too busy laughing, clapping, and cheering, reveling in the unexpected entertainment. Mr. Equatorial's charm, his carefully constructed image, his reputation, all of it was unraveling before his eyes. His face grew pale, his hands shaking as he tried to regain control. But for once, his smooth words and easy smile couldn't save him. "Oh, so this is the art you've been creating, Mr. Equatorial?" Someone shouted, and the crowd erupted into laughter once again. The women who had been featured in the spheres tried to hide their faces, some of them blushing, others glaring daggers at Mr. Equatorial. The men, on the other hand, exchanged knowing looks, nodding as if they'd finally uncovered the truth about the man they'd once admired. Desperate, Mr. Equatorial stood and raised his arms, trying to quiet the crowd. "Please, everyone, this is a misunderstanding," he stammered. These recordings were for historical purposes, to preserve the beauty of Equatoria's finest women. The laughter grew louder, and someone shouted, "Seems like you've preserved more than beauty, Mr. Equatorial." Mr. Equatorial's face burned with humiliation. He had built his entire life around his charm and influence, but now, stripped of his secrets, he was just a man whose pride had led to his downfall. As the laughter died down and the festival continued, Mr. Equatorial slunk away, too humiliated to face the villagers. He retreated to his mansion, where he locked himself in his once prized vault, staring at the now empty shelves where the spheres had once sat. Meanwhile, Shoddy and his friends basked in the glory of their success. The villagers hailed them as heroes, laughing and clapping them on the back, grateful for the unexpected revelation that had brought a new kind of joy to the festival. That night, as the festivities wound down and the villagers returned to their homes, a new legend was born, the legend of the boy who had uncovered Mr. Equatorial's secrets, the tale of a man brought down by his own hubris and the bravery of a curious young boy. And in the days that followed, Mr. Equatorial's name became a byword for pride and secrecy, a cautionary tale for those who thought they could hide their true selves behind charm and a vault of secrets. Pride comes before a fall, and sometimes, laughter is the best remedy for deceit. The morning after the festival, the town of Ayorie was buzzing with gossip. From the baker's shop to the village well, people recounted every juicy detail of the previous night, each tale more embellished than the last. Laughter echoed through the streets as they recalled Mr. Equatorial's failed attempts to explain his historical preservation project and his mortified expressions as his private liaisons were broadcast for all to see. As the sun climbed higher, however, people began to wonder what would happen to Mr. Equatorial now. Would he show his face again? Would he try to deny the events of the night before? Or would he leave the village altogether, too ashamed to continue his life in Ayorie?
Mr. Equatorial, meanwhile, was having the worst morning of his life. He sat in his lavish mansion, alone with his thoughts and the haunting silence that followed the laughter of the night before. He had spent years carefully crafting his image, cultivating relationships, building his influence. But now all of it lay in ruins, shattered by a few curious boys and his own foolish pride. He glanced around his once grand mansion, the golden walls and elaborate furnishings feeling more like a prison than a palace. The vault, his prized possession, stood open and empty, a hollow reminder of the secrets he could no longer hide. For the first time in his life, Mr. Equatorial felt small, vulnerable, and utterly alone. But as the hours passed, a new emotion began to replace his shame: anger. How dare the villagers mock him? How dare they turn on him after everything he had done for them? He had helped them resolve disputes. He had supported their businesses. He had even sacrificed his own time and reputation to be their hero. And this was the thanks he got? He stood, squaring his shoulders, determination flashing in his eyes. He would not let this humiliation define him. He would show the villagers that he was still their leader, their guiding light. He would win back their respect, no matter what it took. With a renewed sense of purpose, Mr. Equatorial, dressed in his finest robes, polished his silver cane and made his way to the town square, where a crowd had already gathered, buzzing with curiosity about his next move. As he approached, the villagers fell silent, some whispering, others smirking, waiting to see what he would do. Mr. Equatorial cleared his throat, raising his hands to quiet the crowd. "My dear friends," he began, his voice steady and smooth, "I stand before you today not as a man hiding behind secrets, but as a man who has devoted his life to this village. I have always acted with the best intentions, always striving to make Ayorie a place of harmony and prosperity." He paused, scanning the crowd, hoping to see at least a few nods of agreement. But instead he was met with skeptical stares and raised eyebrows. "Last night," he continued, "you were shown a glimpse of my personal life. I admit I have made mistakes, and I take full responsibility for my actions. But let us not forget the good I have done. Let us not let a few misunderstandings erase the years of service and sacrifice I have given to this community." A few villagers exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. But just as Mr. Equatorial was starting to feel a flicker of hope, an elderly woman in the crowd, known as Mama Nola, stepped forward. "Service and sacrifice?" she scoffed, her voice carrying through the square. "You mean taking advantage of people, making empty promises and wooing women who trusted you? That's not service, Mr. Equatorial, that's selfishness." The crowd murmured in agreement, and Mr. Equatorial felt his confidence waver, but he pressed on, forcing a smile.
"My dear Mama Nola," he said, trying to sound humble, "I understand your concerns, and I assure you that my intentions were never malicious. I merely wanted to preserve the beauty of our village, to honor the women who have inspired me." Mama Nola raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. Honor them? By recording private moments without their permission? By turning their lives into your own personal trophy collection? The crowd erupted into laughter, and Mr. Equatorial felt his face flush with embarrassment. He had hoped to regain their trust with a grand speech, but instead, he was only digging himself deeper into a hole. Realizing that his speech was only making things worse, Mr. Equatorial took a deep breath, letting his pride fall away, at least for the moment. "All right," he said, his voice softer now. "Perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps I let my ego get the better of me. I have hurt people I cared about, and for that, I am truly sorry." The crowd fell silent, watching him with a mixture of surprise and skepticism. "I know that words alone cannot undo the harm I've caused," he continued, "but I am willing to make amends. I will open my home, my resources, my wealth to help the people of Ayorie. Whatever you need, whether it's funds for a new school, supplies for your businesses, or repairs for your homes, I will provide it." The villagers murmured among themselves, considering his offer. Some were impressed by his willingness to make amends, while others remained suspicious, wondering if this was just another one of his tricks. But before anyone could respond, a voice rang out from the back of the crowd. "And what about the women you deceived?" called a young man, his tone laced with anger. "How do you plan to make amends to them?" Mr. Equatorial hesitated, glancing around the crowd, searching for an answer. He had never truly considered the impact his actions had on the women he had charmed and recorded. To him, they had been fleeting moments, mere memories to be preserved. But now, confronted by the pain he had caused, he found himself at a loss for words. One by one, the women he had deceived stepped forward, each one sharing her story, her heartbreak, her anger. The chief's daughter spoke of how she had trusted him, believed in him, only to discover that she had been just another memory in his vault. The herbalist's wife described the shame she felt, knowing that her private moments had been recorded and stored like a mere artifact. As each woman spoke, the crowd listened in silence, their sympathy and support shifting from Mr. Equatorial to the women he had wronged. And with each story, Mr. Equatorial felt his heart grow heavier, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. For the first time in his life, he saw himself through their eyes, not as a charming, charismatic leader, but as a selfish, manipulative man who had put his own desires above the dignity and respect of others. When the last woman had spoken, the crowd turned to Mr. Equatorial, waiting for his response. He felt his pride slipping away, replaced by a deep, painful humility. "You're right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have been selfish. I have treated you all as objects, as trophies, rather than as people with your own lives, your own feelings. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn it." In the days that followed, Mr. Equatorial made good on his promises. He opened his home to the villagers, offering his wealth and resources to support the community. He funded the construction of a new school, provided supplies for struggling businesses, and even helped repair the homes of those who needed it. But more importantly, he made an effort to apologize personally to each of the women he had wronged, listening to their stories, their anger, their pain. Some accepted his apology, while others remained wary, unwilling to forgive him just yet. But he understood, and he did not push them. He knew that forgiveness, if it came at all, would take time. As the weeks passed, the villagers began to see a change in Mr. Equatorial. He no longer carried himself with the same arrogance, no longer flaunted his wealth or charm. Instead, he became a humble, quiet man, dedicated to serving the community he had once taken for granted. In time, the villagers began to speak of him not as the man who had charmed his way into their lives, but as the man who had learned from his mistakes. He became a symbol of redemption, a reminder that even the most prideful among them could change, could grow, could learn to put others before themselves. And as for Shadi, the boy who had uncovered Mr. Equatorial's secrets, he became a legend in his own right. The villagers praised his courage, his curiosity, his willingness to question even the most powerful man in Ayorie. He grew up to be a respected leader in the community, known for his honesty and integrity. The tale of Mr. Equatorial became a story passed down through generations, a lesson in humility, in the dangers of pride, and in the power of redemption. And as the years went by, the villagers would gather to tell the story, laughing at the memory of the man who had once tried to keep his secrets hidden behind a golden vault. Lesson: true respect is earned through humility, honesty, and the courage to face one's mistakes. In the days following his grand apology and the pledge to make amends, Mr. Equatorial found himself at the center of a different kind of attention. No longer did people approach him with admiration in their eyes or awe in their voices. Instead, they looked at him with something new: expectation. Gone were the luxurious robes and the glint of confidence in his smile. Mr. Equatorial, once known as the man who could charm his way out of any situation, had become a man of humility, a man with a purpose beyond his own ambition. His journey toward redemption had begun, but he knew it would not be an easy one. Every morning, Mr. Equatorial rose with the sun, working alongside the villagers in whatever tasks needed to be done. He helped rebuild homes that had fallen into disrepair, spent his days working in the fields with farmers, and offered his mansion as a communal space where townsfolk could gather for meetings, celebrations, or just a simple meal. His wealth, once a symbol of his influence and power, was now poured into projects that would benefit the entire village. He funded the construction of a new school, outfitted with books, desks, and supplies that had been lacking for years. He established a scholarship fund, ensuring that young people from Ayorie could pursue their dreams without financial obstacles. And each evening, he would gather with the townsfolk, listening to their concerns, their dreams, and their hopes for the future. At first, the villagers watched with cautious curiosity. Some even doubted the sincerity of his efforts, wondering if this was simply another act, another scheme to win back their favor. But as days turned to weeks, and weeks turned to months, they began to see the change in him, a transformation that went beyond mere words. While many villagers began to soften toward him, the women he had wronged were not as easily convinced. They had been betrayed, their trust shattered, and no amount of good deeds could erase the pain he had caused. Yet Mr. Equatorial did not expect their forgiveness. He understood that trust, once broken, was not something that could be mended overnight. One by one, he approached each of them, apologizing not with grand speeches or gestures, but with quiet, heartfelt words. He listened to their stories, their anger, their sadness, and he accepted their pain as his own. Some women forgave him, moved by the sincerity of his efforts to make amends. Others chose to keep their distance, not out of malice, but out of self-preservation. For Mr. Equatorial, this was the hardest lesson of all, the realization that forgiveness was not a right, but a gift, one that he could not demand or expect. As time went on, Mr. Equatorial's once grand mansion transformed into a bustling community center. His wealth, his status, his connections, all of it was channeled into creating opportunities for others. He used his influence not to control, but to empower, to uplift those who had once looked up to him with admiration, only to be let down. He organized trade networks with neighboring villages, creating a market where Ayorie's artisans, farmers, and merchants could sell their goods. He invited teachers, healers, and craftspeople to share their knowledge, creating a learning center where villagers could acquire new skills and improve their livelihoods. And each year, during the village's annual festival, he hosted a feast not to celebrate himself, but to honor the community that had given him a second chance. The townspeople, seeing the impact of his efforts, began to speak of him not as Mr. Equatorial, the charming rogue, but as Mr. Equatorial, the humble servant of Ayorie. The story of Shadi and Mr. Equatorial became a legend in Ayorie, passed down from one generation to the next. It became a story told around fires on quiet evenings, a tale woven into the fabric of the village's history. A story of pride and humility, of deception and redemption, of the power of truth and the strength of community. And as for Mr. Equatorial, he came to see Shadi not as the boy who had brought about his downfall, but as the friend who had given him a chance to truly know himself.
Years passed and Ayorie flourished thanks in no small part to Mr. Equatorial's contributions. But one day an unexpected opportunity arose that would test the strength of his transformation. A merchant from a faraway town approached Mr. Equatorial, offering him a lucrative business deal that could bring even more wealth to Ayorie. The only catch was that it would require him to use his influence to gain certain favors from people in power. bending the rules to suit their interests. The old Mr. Equatorial would have accepted the offer without hesitation, seeing it as another way to strengthen his hold over the village. But the new Mr. Equatorial, the man who had rebuilt his life on honesty and service, paused. He recognized the temptation, the allure of his former life, but he also remembered the pain, the emptiness that had come with it. After much thought, he declined the offer, choosing instead to continue his work within the bounds of integrity. He realized that true wealth was not measured in coins or power, but in the trust and respect of those he served. Legacy of redemption. In his later years, Mr. Equatorial became a symbol of redemption, a reminder that even the most flawed among them could find a path to change. His story, once one of scandal and pride, became a tale of resilience and humility. He lived out his days as a humble man, a man whose journey had taught him that true respect could not be demanded, only earned. As he grew older, the villagers cared for him, honoring him not for his wealth, but for the man he had become. And when he passed, they gathered to remember him not with grand speeches or gilded statues, but with stories, laughter, and quiet gratitude for the lessons he had left behind. And so, the tale of Mr. Equatorial and his forbidden vault became more than just a story of pride and downfall. It became a lesson in the power of change, the strength of forgiveness, and the importance of living a life rooted in truth and integrity. In the years that followed, the village of Ayorie continued to tell the story of Mr. Equatorial and Shadi. Parents shared it with their children, elders recounted it at gatherings, and young people took it to heart as a reminder of the values that bound their community together. The lesson, they said, was simple: that true greatness is not in power or charm, but in the courage to admit one's faults, the humility to seek forgiveness, and the determination to make things right. And as long as the people of Ayorie remembered that, they knew that their village would continue to thrive. The Golden Vault, once a symbol of Mr. Equatorial's secrets, was transformed into a place of learning, a library where the wisdom of Ayorie was preserved and shared for generations to come. And in a corner of that library, a simple plaque bore the words, "The path to redemption is a road of humility, walked by those brave enough to face their own reflection." And so, the legacy of Mr. Equatorial lived on, not as a tale of scandal, but as a story of hope, change, and the enduring strength of the human spirit.